Hi, everybody. I am Karen Sullivan, and today I want to tell you all kinds of fun and interesting things about bighorn sheep. So I'm calling this Bighorns 101. So I work at the National Bighorn Sheep Center in Du Bois, Wyoming. If you're ever in Du Bois, Wyoming, we would love for you to stop by and check out our area. You can see on this first slide what it looks like from the outside. If you come in the building, the first thing you'll see is this display down at the bottom. This is our Grand Slam display. This is the 4 types of wild sheep that are found in North America. And I'll tell you a little more about all of them in a bit. We also have displays of wild sheep from all around the world. So you probably know a lot about wild sheep, but you may just know about the wild sheep that live in North America. There are wild sheep that live all over the world, and these are just some of them. The Marco Polo at the bottom is usually people's favorite sheep because it has by far the biggest horns. He is pretty impressive. Now, the first type of wild sheep I want to tell you a little bit about that lives in North America is the Rocky Mountain Bighorn sheep. The Rocky Mountain Bighorn sheep lives throughout the Western United States and up into part of Canada. This is the type that we have in Wyoming, and I know a lot of you are from Nevada. So there are also some Rocky Mountain Bighorn sheep that are in Nevada and throughout many of the Western states. Now, a little terminology before we get much further. These are 3 Rocky Mountain Bighorn sheep. The first one that you see on the left is the male bighorn sheep, and they are called rams because they ram their heads together during the rut or the mating season. The females are called ewes, but it's not spelled like you might think. It's E-W-E. And then the babies, which are just super cute, they are called lambs. The second type of wild sheep that lives in North America that I want to tell you a little about is the desert bighorn sheep. And I know a lot of you are from the Reno area, so you are probably super familiar with the desert bighorn sheep. They are very well adapted to live in that dry desert environment. They can go weeks without drinking water. And then when they do come to a water source, they can drink gallons and gallons at a time. So they live in the southwest part of the United States and into parts of Mexico as well. And then the next 2 are actually thin horn sheep. Instead of bighorn sheep, you'll notice their horns are a little narrower as far as their diameter, and they have kind of a more yellow color than the bighorn sheep. This is a Dall sheep, which lives in parts of Alaska and also parts of Canada, the Yukon Territory and British Columbia. And they are all white, which is a really amazing adaptation because they live in areas where there's a lot of snow, so they can really blend in those habitats. Then the last one is the stone sheep. They have the smallest range of the 4 types of wild sheep that live in North America. They live in parts of British Columbia and the Yukon Territory, and they're more dark colored with some white patches on them. And their habitat is a lot of scree type areas. So it really helps them blend in. As you notice in the picture on the left, they're really camouflaged in the type of environment in which they live. Now, bighorn sheep have a lot of really cool adaptations. So we'll start with the most obvious one is their big horns, at least on the rams or the males. So they use these big horns for dominance battles during the mating season or the rut in order to determine which rams get to mate with the ewes that are in the area. And the female bighorn sheep, they just have small horns. They devote their energy to reproduction. They don't have dominance battles like the rams do, so they just need small horns. And here I actually have a horn from a ram bighorn sheep and a horn from a ewe, which you can see is much, much smaller. Now, I want to stop here and talk a little bit about horns versus antlers because some people get them confused. So antlers are found on animals like deer, moose, and elk. And antlers are shed every year and then regrow. They're also made of a bony type material. whereas horns are not shed. They stay on the animal their entire life, and they're made of a material called keratin, which you might have heard of before. Keratin is what our hair and our fingernails are made of. And this is a horn, again, from a bighorn sheep ram made of keratin. It's a really hard material. Now, since the horns stay on the animal their whole entire life, you can use those horns to estimate the age of a bighorn sheep ram. On their horns, there are rings called annuli rings that you might be able to see in this horn I'm holding up. And if you count those dark annuli rings, you can estimate the age pretty closely of these rams. And the picture just shows those annuli rings that have been colored so they're easier to see. This this ram was about 7 years old. If we count these dark annuli rings, you can determine that. Now, the average age for a Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep ram is about 12 years, and for a ewe is about 14. The ewes live a little longer. They don't do the dangerous things that those rams do, those dominance battles. Now, another adaptation that's probably my favorite, it's super cool, is the ram's skull. So first, I want to show you why it's important that rams have such an impressive skull. These are a couple of pictures of those dominance battles that occur during the fall. The rams will run at each other up to 30 miles an hour and bash their heads together, and they can do this for hours. Eventually, one of them will take on a submissive posture and will leave. And then the one that wins the battle is the one that gets to mate the ewes that are in the area. So I'll show you this video where you can really get an idea of how hard they can hit those horns together or their heads together and why their skulls are so important.
Is finally ready to compete. His opponent is a bigger, stronger 8-year-old ram. The challenger must provoke the fight. With body kicks and tongue flicking, he taunts his opponent. The older ram seems to walk away in submission. But his posture is known as the low stretch. It means, you want a piece of me? Come get it. The force of the impact, delivered at 35 kilometers per hour, is enough to kill a human instantly. Two layers of skull protect their brains. The fight lasts for hours, each ram battering the other.
So there you can really see why it's important that bighorn sheep have a special skull to protect their brain. And this is a cross section or half of a ram's skull. And inside you can see that there are two layers of bone, and between those layers of bone are those honeycomb structures to act like a helmet to protect the bighorn sheep when they are running at each other at 30 miles an hour. And here I think you can see this is that honeycomb structure. So just think of it as a helmet. Bighorn sheep are born with these amazing helmets. Now, the second adaptation that I think is really incredible in bighorn sheep is their eyes. If you look at the pupil of this bighorn sheep ram, notice its shape. So it is actually a rectangle or an oval, whereas ours is a circle. So the fact that their pupil is rectangular allows them to see a broad range. And the fact that their eyes are on the side of their head also allows them to have an amazing peripheral vision. They can see almost 340 degrees around. So if you were to put your fingers in front of your eyes and move them around until you can't see them anymore with your peripheral vision, our peripheral vision is about 180 degrees. Well, imagine theirs is almost a complete circle, almost 340. So that's really important because it helps them to be on the lookout for predators or animals that want to kill and eat them. Now, their feet are also really amazing that help them get away from those predators and get up into safe escape terrain. And in the bottom two pictures, you can see examples of some types of escape terrain. Those feet are so special, they allow the animals to run on ledges that are as small as 2 inches wide. Imagine us with our big feet trying to run up on ledges and cliffs like that. And I have a foot here. When the animal's alive, the bottom part right here is kind of spongy, like a rock climber's shoe or like a really grippy tennis shoe. So it helps them to grip onto those rocks and ledges and run away from any potential predators. Now, their fur is also really important because bighorn sheep, especially Dall, Stone, and Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep, can live in places where it gets really cold in the winters. So they have an outer layer of fur called guard hairs, and the guard hairs are actually hollow inside. They look like tiny little straws if you could see them under a microscope, like in that picture. So that helps insulate them from the outside air. And then underneath those guard hairs, they have a layer of fur that's more woolly or a fleecy layer. That fleece layer they can shed in the spring and summer. So the Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep, especially around here, are really shaggy and rough about May and June. And some people think they're sick, but they're just losing that winter coat once they don't need it anymore. So now I have a poll question for you that I think Ryan's gonna put up for me. About what do you think is the most interesting bighorn sheep adaptation? So answer this for me really quick. I just want to see what you think. And Ryan, I can't see the results, so you might have to let me know.
So it looks like the skull has 49% of the votes. So skull is in first place by more than double anything else.
Wow. All right. Well, good job, guys. Yeah, I agree that skull is pretty amazing. Let's see. I want to go back and show you. Oops. Oh, there's the results. Okay. So skull 50%. Wow. So that's the winner. And yeah, maybe it is the most important thing to these guys. Sorry, I'm having trouble advancing my slides. Here we go. Right. So we had a lot of questions earlier in one of the sessions about what bighorn sheep eat. Well, bighorn sheep are herbivores, which means they just eat plants. And specifically, the herd that's here where I am is called the Whiskey Mountain bighorn sheep herd. This is what their diet consists of. And other wild sheep in other parts of the country or the world, their diet might be slightly different, but they all are herbivores. So we say that they graze on grasses, they browse on brushes, and they feed on forbs. And forbs are flowering plants. That's really their favorite food. But flowering plants are only available for a pretty short time each year to them. Now, desert bighorn sheep also eat cactus, And I've seen them using their horns to break a cactus open and then eat some of the inside of it, which also helps them to get some moisture, some water. Since bighorn sheep do just eat plants, they have to have a really special digestive system to get nutrients out of those plants. Imagine if you had to live on something like sagebrush. I mean, that is pretty tough to imagine if that was your main food source certain times of the year. So their digestive system is similar to in cattle. They're ruminants. Their stomach has 4 parts. So when they first ingest grass or sagebrush or whatever they're eating, it goes into the first part of their stomach called the rumen. And that's where bacteria will start to break down that food and help them to digest some of the grasses. Then they regurgitate that food and they have to chew it again. So chewing their cud, which you might have seen in bighorn sheep or with cattle. And Dr. Brock had a really amazing video this morning you might have seen that showed a bighorn sheep regurgitating that cud and starting to chew it again. Then after they chew it the second time, it goes through the other parts of their digestive system, their reticulum, their omasum, and then the abomasum is the part of their stomach that is similar to ours. It's where the stomach acid is created and from there into their intestines. So that really helps them get all the nutrients that they possibly can out of things that can be really hard to digest. Now, bighorn sheep have to be on the lookout for predators. Bighorns are prey animals, so there are predators that will kill them and eat them if given the chance. And the most common predator in most bighorn sheep herds are the mountain lions. Here, this is the most common, and I think with most desert bighorn herds as well. Then we also have golden eagles that will prey on the lambs. Golden eagles have a wingspan of over 6 feet, so they can pretty easily just swoop down and pick up a little lamb when they're first born. The lambs only weigh maybe 6 or 8 pounds when they're newborn. Then there are also wolves throughout the West that can prey on bighorn sheep. Coyotes, which are pretty small, so they mainly would prey on the lambs, just like the golden eagles. And then there are also grizzly bears and black bears in different parts of the West. So they can be predators as well of bighorn sheep. But remember, bighorn sheep have those pretty special feet, so they can run up to what's called escape terrain, and they can get away from a lot of predators. Now, not the golden eagle and not the mountain lion so much, but the others they can get away from pretty easily. Some of the challenges that bighorn sheep throughout the West face include loss of habitat. So as humans have moved west throughout history, we have taken over a lot of the bighorn sheep habitat with our homes and our roads and developments. And habitat fragmentation, as things like highways are built, it makes it more and more challenging for bighorn sheep and other animals to move from one area to another. So they may get kind of stuck in one really small specific area and not able to migrate or not able to breed with other bighorn sheep herds. For some desert bighorn sheep, a lack of water can be a problem, but as you heard in some of the earlier sessions, there are guzzlers that various wildlife groups have worked to put out in the desert areas so that those bighorns can get water more easily. The biggest challenge, however, for most bighorn sheep herds is pneumonia. So pneumonia is something that people can get to. It's a lung disease. You might know someone that's had pneumonia, or maybe you've had pneumonia. Most times though, humans can recover from pneumonia because we have great medical care and lots of medications that can be used to treat the pneumonia. Well, that's not so in bighorn sheep. They can't just go to a doctor and get an antibiotic to get rid of that pneumonia. So the most common bacterium that causes pneumonia in bighorn sheep is something called Mycoplasma Ovi Pneumoniae. And there are some other types of bacteria that can cause pneumonia as well, but this seems to be the biggest problem. And the way that bighorn sheep get this pneumonia is that domestic sheep and goats carry the pneumonia pathogens, not just Mycoplasma, but the others as well. They don't usually get sick though from any of these pathogens. They just carry the bacteria around in their respiratory tract. But then if wild sheep come into areas where those domestic sheep or goats have been, the wild sheep can get those pathogens, from the other animals or from the environment, from the soil maybe. And then the wild sheep get really sick from these pathogens. There is no effective treatment at this time. There's no vaccination at this time that can be used to help the bighorn sheep. And when pneumonia is introduced into a herd of bighorn sheep, there can be huge losses. So from 5 to 95% of a herd has been documented to be lost from pneumonia. So the best solution right now for bighorn sheep is to keep domestic sheep and wild sheep separated. So a lot of similarities between this issue in wild sheep and what's going on right now with the COVID virus that everyone's so concerned about. The best solution is to keep healthy people away from people who have COVID, just like keeping wild sheep away from domestic sheep. Now, these maps you might have seen earlier, some of the previous presentations, but they're really telling. In 1850, wild sheep were throughout the West. There were huge herds, and they were just, you can see on this map, almost covered the whole West. By 1960, there were a lot less wild sheep because of westward expansion, unregulated hunting, disease, because as people moved west, so did their livestock. So diseases were introduced into the herds. And then a lot of organizations like the Wild Sheep Foundation and game and fish organizations and many other similar type organizations got involved and wanted to try and help wild sheep. So they've done this by improving habitat, translocating wild sheep from one place to another. And you can see in the most current map on the right that their wild sheep are now in more areas than they were in 1960. The population has increased. Now it'll never go back to what it was in 1850 because so many of us live in the West now. But hopefully with the continued action of these organizations like the Wild Sheep Foundation, the sheep population will continue to increase. So what can you do? How can you help? Well, in a lot of places during the lambing time of year, during the spring, habitat areas are closed. Game and Fish will lock gates and close off areas to try and keep people out. So respect those closures. Leave the sheep alone when it's time for lambing. Give them some peace and quiet. If you do encounter bighorn sheep, respect their space. Just like with any other animal, don't get too close. Give them plenty of space. Don't stress them out. Just keep your distance. Contact a local wildlife agency to see how you can volunteer. There are usually lots of opportunities to volunteer with different agencies and learn more about wildlife. Educate people. So now after today, you have learned so much about wild sheep and wildlife and conservation. Educate your family. Tell them what you've learned today. Educate your friends. Tell them about bighorn sheep and the challenges that they face, and tell them about all the amazing adaptations that bighorn sheep have. They are really special animals, and I hope that we can continue to take care of them, conserve them, as well as other wildlife and wildland. So thank you for joining us today and for learning all about wild sheep and lots of other things. And hopefully we've been able to answer some of your questions. If you have other questions that weren't answered, feel free to email me. My email address is here on this slide. And the website for the National Bighorn Sheep Center is here as well. If you want to know anything else about bighorn sheep, look at our website or get in touch with me. And I sure appreciate you all joining in today.